For decades, the position of the First Lady has been widely misunderstood, often relegated in public perception to a role that is ornamental, symbolic, or secondary to the president's. Yet, this role has quietly held immense influence over the national conversation, social consciousness, and even policy advocacy. Despite not being an elected official, the First Lady occupies a uniquely powerful place in American civic life, positioned at the intersection of visibility, legacy, and cultural influence. Her responsibilities may not be codified in law, but they are deeply rooted in tradition and expectation, evolving across administrations and political ideologies. From the earliest days of the Republic, spouses of presidents have shaped how the nation sees its leaders, how it responds to crises, and how it grapples with social change. They become, whether willingly or not, a symbol of American womanhood, family values, and moral stewardship. Their presence on the public stage is not merely about fashion statements or formal dinners. It carries a profound representational weight that reflects the nation's own aspirations and anxieties. Throughout history, the role has been leveraged in powerful and diverse ways. Eleanor Roosevelt redefined it by transforming the East Wing into a base of operations for civil rights advocacy and humanitarian work, setting a precedent for First Ladies to be active political partners rather than passive bystanders. She wrote columns, held press conferences, and even addressed the United Nations. Her influence was not only visible, it was measurable. Lady Bird Johnson used her platform to push for environmental conservation and highway beautification, an early foray into what would become a cornerstone of modern environmental policy. Betty Ford candidly discussed addiction and women's rights, breaking social taboos with candor that was considered radical for her time. More recently, others have championed causes like childhood health, education, veteran support, and literacy, effectively becoming national spokespeople for issues that might otherwise fall through the cracks of legislative agendas. What becomes clear is that the First Lady's office can serve as a force multiplier for social impact, using public trust and media access to advance important but often underfunded or marginalized initiatives. Despite lacking any constitutional mandate, the First Lady has traditionally embodied a form of soft power that complements the hard power of the presidency. Her public engagements are carefully watched and widely interpreted. A visit to a disaster-struck area, a speech at a women's conference, or even a holiday event at the White House becomes a statement that ripples across communities and media cycles. The symbolism attached to her words, wardrobe, and actions is profound, because they reflect not just personal values, but perceived national ones. The First Lady stands as a kind of cultural mirror, reflecting what the administration prioritizes, what it chooses to ignore, and how it wishes to be perceived. When she engages with the public, she bridges the gap between policy and people, offering a human face to what is often an impersonal institution. Her warmth, composure, and outreach efforts can soften the edges of an administration, offer reassurance during crises, and amplify empathy at times when political discourse becomes cold or alienating. Moreover, the First Lady often assumes an unspoken leadership role within the fabric of the White House. She supervises a full staff within the East Wing, manages official ceremonies, coordinates with nonprofit partners, and steers national initiatives, often without formal credit or visibility. This administrative and emotional labor, though invisible to many, is essential to the social and ceremonial rhythm of the presidency. From hosting world leaders to overseeing historic holiday traditions, her influence weaves itself into the White House's image both domestically and abroad. She becomes the anchor in an ecosystem of protocol and politics, managing expectations with diplomacy and discretion, and while she may not hold legislative authority, she holds unparalleled access to the president, offering counsel and insight from a perspective no one else can. In a media-driven culture, her presence, or absence, is a statement in itself. In an age of optics and narratives, the First Lady is more than a supportive spouse. She is a storyteller for the nation, helping to shape how America sees itself and how the world sees America. Her words can soothe tension, redirect criticism, and provide clarity during confusion. She serves as a living symbol of continuity between administrations, embodying the human aspect of an otherwise bureaucratic system. Whether attending funerals, comforting military families, or advocating for school reform, the First Lady participates in nation building on a deeply intimate level. Her actions, even if apolitical, become political. Her priorities signal national values, and her silence, when it happens, is just as loudly interpreted as her speeches. The role of the First Lady, then, is not simply ceremonial. It is an evolving institution of cultural influence, public diplomacy, and often unacknowledged power. It is a position that invites scrutiny and expectation, while also offering an unparalleled opportunity to impact millions of lives through visibility, compassion, and, in a democratic society, visibility is not just about being seen, it is about being accountable. Public figures, particularly those associated with national leadership, inhabit roles that are both symbolic and functional. Their presence in the public eye carries implications for trust, transparency, and civic engagement. When someone occupies a high-profile position within or adjacent to government, whether elected or unelected, their visibility becomes a barometer for how seriously they take the responsibilities attached to their platform. This visibility is not about constant exposure or tabloid coverage. Rather, it is about participating meaningfully in the public discourse and being accessible to the very people whose lives are influenced by their presence and choices. In this context, the presence of a First Lady, or any public figure within the upper echelons of national life, becomes more than ceremonial. It becomes an act of public accountability. When they step onto the stage, attend a school event, visit a hospital, or speak on an issue of national concern, they reaffirm a critical democratic principle that those in positions of power and influence are not above public scrutiny, they are subject to it. This principle of visibility as accountability is rooted in the expectations of modern political culture. Public service, particularly in the highest office, is not a private enterprise, it is a social contract. The public does not merely elect a president, they engage with a network of people around that individual who also become significant cultural symbols. The First Lady, while not elected, is undeniably part of that network. Her role has become increasingly institutionalized over time, complete with staff initiatives and communications channels. With that institutional structure comes the expectation of presence. It is through being seen that one remains answerable to the public, even if that answerability does not manifest through elections or direct policy making. Absence in this framework becomes more than a personal choice. It becomes a statement, intentional or not, about detachment, disinterest, or disregard for public dialogue. In high office, where every movement is interpreted as message, the decision to retreat from the spotlight has consequences far beyond the individual. Moreover, visibility creates a sense of national unity. When someone closely affiliated with leadership shows up at schools, disaster zones, charity events, or national holidays, they are performing a public ritual that says, "We are here, we see you, and we are connected." These appearances become moments of reassurance, especially in times of crisis or social tension. They show that leadership is not abstract, not removed behind marble walls, but present and engaged in the lived experiences of everyday people. The First Lady, in particular, has often served as a softer bridge between the public and an administration. Her visibility allows for the administration to appear more human, more empathetic, and more attuned to the needs of constituents beyond legislative goals. This function is not minor or superficial. It is vital to maintaining emotional trust between the government and its people. It allows citizens to feel that someone, even if not the president himself, is bearing witness to their struggles and triumphs. Furthermore, in an era where disinformation, cynicism, and detachment run high, visibility serves as a countermeasure to alienation. When a prominent public figure disappears for extended periods without explanation, it fuels speculation, rumor, and mistrust. People begin to question motives, wonder about internal dysfunction, or interpret silence as contempt. Transparency does not require constant disclosure, but it does demand clarity of intent. Public figures must understand that part of their role is not just to serve, but to be seen serving. Their visibility allows people to assess them, critique them, and hold them accountable in the court of public opinion. Without this layer of visibility, accountability weakens, and the space is left open for misinformation to fester. The less the public sees, the more it imagines, and rarely are those imagined scenarios positive or fair. There is also a gendered lens to this conversation, especially in the context of a first lady. Women in public life are often subjected to double standards, expected to be present, polished, and personable while simultaneously judged for being too visible, too vocal, or too independent. Yet even within this unfair terrain, the consistent presence of women in roles like the First Lady has helped normalize female visibility in power structures. To retreat from the public eye, then, becomes more than a personal act. It subtly undermines the historical efforts made by women before to carve out space for visibility, relevance, and voice in national politics. When the spouse of the president chooses not to participate visibly in national life, it erases a touch point that many citizens, especially women and girls, look to as a symbol of influence and possibility. Even when apolitical, the First Lady's visibility contributes to cultural representation, showing that leadership can be caring, involved, and multidimensional. The absence of that figure can inadvertently reinforce outdated notions about women's roles as secondary, silent, or decorative. Visibility, ultimately, is a form of service. It is a gesture of openness and engagement, a way of acknowledging the public's right to see and interpret those who move within the highest circles of power. It does not mean surrendering privacy entirely or becoming a media spectacle, but it does mean showing up, not just for photo opportunities, but for the rituals of democracy that bind leadership to the people it serves. In a democratic society where the people are the ultimate stakeholders of government, curiosity is not just natural, it is fundamental. The public's right to wonder, to question, and to seek clarity about those who represent them or live in the shadow of power is not a form of gossip or idle speculation. It is an expression of civic engagement. When a figure so closely associated with national leadership remains conspicuously absent from the public sphere, particularly during moments of national significance, it is entirely reasonable for citizens to ask, why, where, what does this silence mean? The relationship between the public and those in or near positions of influence is shaped not only by duty, but by perception. While it may be easy to dismiss public interest in non-elected individuals as invasive or trivial, doing so overlooks a deeper truth. Visibility, participation, and presence in public life, especially within the White House, carry symbolic weight that transcends individual choice. When someone in such a role disappears, the questions that follow are not breaches of privacy, they are symptoms of a society trying to interpret the language of leadership through who shows up and who doesn't. This right to wonder is rooted in a long tradition of holding power accountable through observation and dialogue. The American people fund the executive mansion, sustain its ceremonial functions, and afford immense cultural status to those who occupy it. In return, there is an unspoken contract that those who benefit from the privileges of proximity to the presidency will acknowledge that public interest is not only expected, it is justified. The role of the First Lady, while not elected, is institutionally supported and often used to launch national initiatives, represent the administration abroad, and shape policy indirectly. This position is steeped in both tradition and taxpayer investment. Whether it's redecorating the White House, hosting dignitaries, launching awareness campaigns, or attending state funerals, the First Lady becomes a channel through which the administration connects with the public in more human, relatable terms. When that figure is missing, the absence is not neutral. It raises questions that belong not to the press alone, but to every citizen who recognizes that visibility in public life is not merely performative. It's part of the democratic dialogue. In times of uncertainty, national transition, or crisis, the public often looks to familiar figures in leadership to offer reassurance, guidance, or at the very least, symbolic unity. The First Lady has historically served this function, not as a policymaker, but as a steady, compassionate presence that complements the often hard-edged posture of political leadership. Whether standing beside victims of disaster, visiting military families, or reading to children in schools, her presence offers continuity, calm, and cultural resonance. When this presence is absent, especially repeatedly or without explanation, it challenges the public's expectations and invites concern. It's not only about where she is physically, but what her silence might signify emotionally or politically. Is it disengagement? Is it disagreement? Is it disinterest? These questions, while speculative in nature, are not baseless. They are the natural result of a civic culture that understands leadership as a visible, shared experience, not something hidden behind closed doors. To suggest that the public has no right to inquire about such an absence is to misunderstand the nature of public life in a transparent democracy. Civic curiosity is not the same as prurient curiosity. The former is anchored in the belief that individuals connected to national power should reflect in some meaningful way the values and concerns of the nation. A figure like the First Lady is not merely a spouse or a bystander. She becomes an avatar for national priorities, style, tone, and interpersonal diplomacy. Her engagement, or lack thereof, influences how the administration is perceived both domestically and internationally. For the public to notice her disappearance is not a breach of etiquette. It is a reflection of how deeply embedded she is in the public's understanding of leadership. Her absence is not private, it's public, because everything about the White House exists within the realm of public symbolism. Furthermore, in an age where media access is unparalleled and appearances are meticulously curated, consistent absence stands out even more starkly. It feels deliberate, and in the absence of explanation, the narrative fills itself in. Speculation arises not because people are nosy, but because in a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, silence from public figures is not neutral. It is loud. It creates a vacuum of understanding, which the public will naturally try to fill. It is often said that nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the public imagination. Where there is no explanation, there will be interpretation. And while some may argue for the right to privacy, which certainly exists, it must be balanced against the reality that presence in or near the highest office in the land redefines the boundaries of personal retreat. The public has every right to wonder, to notice, and to inquire, not maliciously, but thoughtfully, critically, and in good faith. The modern media landscape is a paradoxical terrain where silence can be as deafening as spectacle is blinding. In the age of 24/7 news cycles, algorithm-driven platforms, and click-based economies, what the media chooses to highlight and what it chooses to ignore speaks volumes about power, priorities, and narrative control. When it comes to public figures associated with national leadership, especially those adjacent to the presidency, media treatment is rarely neutral. Some individuals are thrust into relentless exposure, every move scrutinized, and every expression dissected. Others, curiously, are allowed to slip into shadows, their prolonged absences treated with surprising indifference by the very institutions that normally thrive on visibility. The contrast between media silence and media spectacle isn't just an editorial decision. It's a reflection of cultural complicity, selective outrage, and the often unseen forces that shape public consciousness. When a high-profile figure who traditionally occupies a visible role in national life disappears from the public stage and the media fails to press for answers, it raises uncomfortable questions, not only about that individual's intentions, but also about the media's willingness to hold power to account consistently. This uneven coverage reveals a troubling asymmetry. Certain figures are subjected to constant attention, regardless of the weight of their actions. A fashion choice, a facial expression, a momentary pause in speech can become viral content, spawning headlines, think pieces, and endless commentary. Others, however, seem to operate in a protective vacuum, shielded from scrutiny under the guise of privacy, family matters, or presumed irrelevance. The distinction between who becomes a spectacle and who is spared reveals not only bias, but also a manipulation of narrative framing that is both strategic and ideological. Media silence is not mere absence, it is a decision, often one of deference or discomfort, revealing a reluctance to challenge certain subjects. In contrast, media spectacle, while appearing critical or investigative on the surface, often devolves into shallow fixation, missing the deeper questions in favor of sensationalism. Both silence and spectacle distort reality, not by falsifying facts, but by disproportionately distributing attention. This distortion matters deeply when we consider figures like the First Lady, who traditionally serves as a barometer of an administration's tone and values. Her presence, or lack thereof, should be of legitimate journalistic interest. In past presidencies, media coverage of First Ladies has often been unrelenting, sometimes veering into the absurd. Everything from garden renovations to holiday decorations has been dissected and politicized. Yet, when a First Lady vanishes from public events, skips major state functions, or declines to participate in customary roles, the silence from many media outlets is striking. The public is left without context, without inquiry, without the investigative pressure that typically accompanies the behaviors of public figures. This silence becomes complicity. It suggests that the media, far from being a watchdog, can also become an enabler of disengagement, normalizing absence and muting public expectations by simply choosing not to raise the question at all. What emerges from this dynamic is a dangerous dual reality. On one side, media spectacle manufactures outrage or fascination, often over trivial matters, while failing to engage in substantive analysis. On the other, media silence erases relevant questions, allowing certain figures to float above accountability under a veil of selective disinterest. Both dynamics infantilize the audience. Spectacle distracts them with noise. Silence denies them information. Together, they undermine the public's ability to fully understand and assess the people who hold influence in their government. In an environment where visibility often equates to accountability, the media's choices shape not only what we see, but how we think. They decide who becomes a cultural touchstone and who is allowed to remain a mystery. This power is immense and rarely acknowledged, even as it quietly reorders our perception of civic duty and leadership presence. Compounding this issue is the role of media gatekeeping in shaping narratives based on identity, affiliation, or perceived temperament. A first lady who is outspoken, emotionally expressive, or ideologically active is more likely to become the target of spectacle. Her words will be examined with a microscope, her initiatives politicized, her wardrobe analyzed with unfair intensity. Meanwhile, a first lady who avoids the public eye, who retreats from traditional duties or resists engagement, may be rewarded with silence, not because the media respects her privacy, but because it has decided her absence is less contentious or more acceptable based on unspoken standards. This double standard is not neutral. It shapes public memory, influences national expectations, and reinforces archetypes of how women in power should behave. The quieter figure is seen as graceful, mysterious, or dignified. The visible one as polarizing, assertive, or too ambitious. In either case, media framing dictates public perception, not based on facts, but on tone and emphasis. The result is an ecosystem where presence and absence are politicized through narrative architecture rather than transparent reporting. We are not simply observing what happens, we are consuming what is curated, and while spectacle draws our attention toward the immediate and superficial, silence robs us of context, history, and the opportunity to demand more from those who serve, whether officially or symbolically. In a functioning democracy, the media's role should not be to protect or provoke selectively, but to question consistently, to report fairly, and to remember that in the absence of accountability, power, no matter how symbolic, drifts into immunity. The roles we assign to public figures, especially those adjacent to political leadership, are not simply reflections of their own ambitions or personalities. They are, more profoundly, mirrors to our collective expectations as a society. In the case of the First Lady, a role both ceremonial and culturally weighted, what we anticipate from her presence, conduct, and involvement often reveals more about our national psyche than about the individual occupying the position. These expectations are not fixed. They evolve with time, shaped by history, media portrayal, partisan lenses, and shifting ideas of gender, decorum, and duty. Yet they remain powerful. We expect warmth, grace, public service, and symbolic unity. We look for empathy when the nation grieves, joy when the country celebrates, and visibility when values are being affirmed. When the occupant of this role steps back from the spotlight, or chooses not to engage with the public in meaningful ways, it forces a confrontation, not only with her silence, but with the assumptions that underlie our response to it. We are compelled to ask not only where she is, but why her absence matters to us so deeply. These expectations are rooted in precedent, but also in desire. Americans have come to view the First Lady as a sort of national moral compass, not elected, but elevated by association. This perception turns her into a character in our civic story, part diplomat, part maternal figure, part cultural curator. We expect her to support charitable causes, mentor youth, advocate for non-partisan issues, and appear at pivotal national moments. We imagine her walking through hospital wards, sitting with children in schools, attending military ceremonies, and hosting state dinners. These images, deeply entrenched in the national consciousness, are not just traditions. They are visual affirmations that leadership is human, compassionate, and responsive. When these rituals are interrupted by absence, the rupture feels symbolic, as if something larger is missing, not just a person, but a thread in the national fabric. Our questioning, then, isn't idle curiosity. It's a reaction to a break in a performance that we've been conditioned to see as essential to the stability and unity of public life. Furthermore, the expectations placed upon the First Lady are magnified by the gendered dynamics of public scrutiny. Women in the public eye are often expected to strike an impossible balance, to be visible but not too vocal, supportive but not assertive, stylish but not superficial. The First Lady becomes a figure onto which we project our ideals and anxieties about femininity, power, and propriety. When she is silent or absent, we are confronted not only with the disruption of tradition, but also with our discomfort around autonomy and deviation from script. Her absence forces us to examine whether our expectations are fair or whether they stem from an outdated template of what a woman in proximity to power is supposed to do. It also exposes the tension between individual agency and public obligation. Can someone who did not ask for a political role still be expected to fulfill one simply by virtue of being present in the White House? And if she does not, do we fault her, or do we question the role itself? This reflection becomes even more complex when we consider how race, class, and ideology shape our expectations differently depending on who is in the role. Some First Ladies have been granted grace and privacy, their choices seen as dignified even when minimal. Others have been scrutinized mercilessly, their involvement interpreted as overreaching or inappropriate. The standards are not uniform, and they are certainly not impartial. What one First Lady is praised for, another may be condemned for, often based on biases that are unspoken but deeply ingrained. Our expectations, then, are not simply civic. They are cultural artifacts that shift depending on the identity of the person before us. The absence of a First Lady is not just about what she chooses not to do. It is about what we are conditioned to believe she owes us. This mirror to our expectations forces us to wrestle with the symbolic weight we place on presence itself. In many ways, the First Lady's participation in public life serves as a temperature check for the nation's emotional state. Her speeches, her projects, her appearances all function as signals. They tell us whether the White House sees us, hears us, values our stories. When that signal goes dark, when there is no presence to read, no message to interpret, we don't just lose a figurehead, we lose a sense of ritual affirmation. Our expectations are not simply about wanting to be entertained or reassured, they are about wanting to feel connected to the institutions that govern us. The First Lady, though unelected, has historically operated as a bridge between the political and the personal, the ceremonial and the intimate. When that bridge disappears, we feel the gap in emotional continuity, and in that space of discomfort, we confront the assumptions we've long carried about visibility, responsibility, and national unity. Our response to such an absence also exposes our relationship with symbolism and performance in public life. Much of leadership, especially in democratic societies, is performative, not in the sense of being inauthentic, but in the sense of carrying out rituals that reinforce trust and legitimacy. We expect presidents to deliver addresses during crises, to lay wreaths on memorial days, to tour disaster sites, not because their presence changes policy in that moment, but because the act itself carries symbolic weight. Similarly, we expect the First Lady to fulfill her own set of public rituals. Her presence at school visits, charity events, or national celebrations is not just about what she says or does, it's about what she represents. When she's missing, we feel that absence not just as a private decision, but as a deviation from a shared civic script. Our reaction is not just about her, it's about the mirror she holds up to our deeply embedded belief that visibility in public life means recognition, respect, and commitment to shared values. In political life, silence is never just the absence of speech. It is an act, a statement, a deliberate or inadvertent performance that invites interpretation. When someone in close proximity to the highest office in the land remains consistently and conspicuously silent, the meaning of that silence becomes a reflection, not just of personal preference or temperament, but of the broader political culture that surrounds and enables it. A first lady who does not speak, who does not appear, who chooses detachment over participation, becomes more than an individual enigma. She becomes a symbol of the way power is managed, protected, and performed in the modern era. Her silence draws attention not just to herself, but to the environment that permits, even rewards, withdrawal. It reveals a political culture that is increasingly comfortable with opacity, selective engagement, and the redefinition of public roles based on strategic silence rather than open discourse. This silence forces us to interrogate how political institutions have evolved, not necessarily toward greater inclusiveness or accountability, but toward greater control over image, access, and narrative. In the past, the First Lady's role was viewed as a sort of soft power instrument, a channel for humanizing the administration, signaling its values, and demonstrating a sense of public responsibility through ceremonial duties. When that tradition is disrupted through persistent silence or disengagement, it signals a shift in how this administration views the function of symbolic roles. Rather than using visibility as a tool of connection or reassurance, silence becomes a mechanism of insulation, an intentional disengagement that sidelines public curiosity and limits emotional transparency. What this suggests is a political culture that increasingly tolerates, even normalizes, detachment from constituents, where visibility is managed as a threat rather than embraced as a duty. Her silence also illuminates the performative nature of modern politics, where appearances and messaging are orchestrated with meticulous intent. In this context, saying nothing is not a lack of preparation, it is a strategy. It represents a tightly held narrative approach that prioritizes control over communication. Political culture today, particularly in the executive sphere, places immense value on branding, media discipline, and curated optics. In such an environment, absence becomes an asset. It avoids risk, shields from controversy, and starves critics of ammunition. The First Lady's silence thus may not be an oversight or reluctance, but a calculated decision, a mirror reflecting the broader political ethos where accessibility is seen as vulnerability and silence becomes a tool of power. This isn't just about personality or privacy. It's about a cultural shift in how public service is defined and performed, one that increasingly prioritizes image management over civic presence. Moreover, her silence offers insight into how modern political culture handles discomfort and dissent within its own ranks. In the past, moments of tension or ideological divergence between a First Lady and a sitting president, whether subtle or overt, have been sources of media speculation and public discussion. These moments were viewed as signs of individuality, personal principle, or moral conscience. When silence replaces even the most symbolic forms of engagement, it raises the possibility that discord, if it exists, must be hidden, controlled, or entirely removed from public view. Political culture in this light becomes not just about governance, but about the maintenance of a seamless, conflict-free facade. We are no longer witnessing real individuals navigating the complexity of public life. We are watching tightly constructed performances where silence functions as a screen, behind which political contradictions and human differences are conveniently erased or ignored. This phenomenon reflects a deeper unease within our democratic institutions, a growing comfort with disengagement as a political stance. The silent First Lady, whether intentionally or not, becomes a case study in how far political culture has drifted from accessibility and openness. It suggests that the structures of power are increasingly indifferent to tradition, ceremony, and public expectations unless they serve a direct strategic purpose. Her absence, instead of triggering institutional introspection or calls for transparency, is often met with quiet acceptance or vague justifications. This signals to the public that participation is optional, that roles once considered essential to the democratic theatre are now negotiable or disposable. It reshapes the public's understanding of what leadership looks like and teaches us that silence, once considered a lapse, is now part of the language of modern political operation. Finally, what this silence teaches us is how much political culture has come to depend on passivity, on the assumption that the public will not question too loudly, and that media will move on if there is no spectacle to fuel. It reveals an administration's confidence in its ability to weather disengagement without significant public cost. This is not unique to one person or party. It is part of a larger trend in democratic erosion, where the symbolic functions of leadership are hollowed out and repurposed for private comfort or tactical neutrality. The First Lady's silence, therefore, is not just about what one individual chooses to do or not do. It is a reflection of a broader system that increasingly sees public service not as a responsibility to be honored, but as a stage to be managed, sanitized, or exited entirely when it no longer serves the narrative being constructed.